The Velveteen Rabbit, or How Toys Become Real. There was once a Velveteen Rabbit, and in the beginning he was really amazing. He was fat and bunchy as a rabbit should be. His coat was spotted brown and white. He had real thread whiskers, and his ears were lined with pink satin. On Christmas morning, when he sat wedged in the top of the boy's stocking with a sprig of holly between his paws, the effect was charming. There were other things in the stocking, nuts and oranges and a toy engine and chocolate almonds and a clockwork mouse, but the rabbit was the best of all. For at least 2 hours the boy loved him. And then there was a great rustling of tissue paper and unwrapping of parcels, and in the excitement of looking at all the new presents, the Velveteen Rabbit was forgotten. For a long time he lived in the toy cupboard or on the nursery floor, and no one thought very much about him. He was naturally shy, and being made only of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys quite snubbed him. The mechanical toys were very superior and looked down upon everyone else. They were full of modern ideas and pretended they were real, but the rabbit didn't know that real rabbits existed. He thought they were all stuffed with sawdust like himself. So the poor little rabbit was made to feel very insignificant and commonplace. And the only person who was kind to him at all was the Skin Horse. The Skin Horse had lived longer in the nursery than any of the others. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches, and most of the hair on his tail had been pulled out. He was wise, for he had seen many mechanical toys arrive to boast and swagger, and by break their mainsprings and pass, and he knew that they were only toys and would never turn into anything else. For nursery magic is very strange and wonderful, and only those playthings that are old and wise and experienced, like the Skin Horse, understand all about it. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and stick out handles?" "Real isn't how you are made," said the Skin Horse. "It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the Skin Horse, for he was always truthful. "When you're real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" the rabbit asked. "Or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the Skin Horse. "It takes a long time. Generally, by the time you're real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you're real, you can't be ugly." "I suppose you're real," said Rabbit. "The boy's uncle made me real," the Skin Horse said. "That was a great many years ago. But once you're real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always." The rabbit sighed. He longed to become real, to know what it felt like, and yet the idea of growing shabby and losing his eyes and whiskers was rather sad. He wished that he could come real, without these uncomfortable things happening. There was a person called Nana who rolled the nursery. Sometimes she took no notice of the playthings lying about, and sometimes she went swooping about like a great wind and hustled them away in cupboards. She called this tidying up, and all the playthings hated it. The rabbit didn't mind so much, for whenever he was thrown, he came down soft. One evening, when the boy was going to bed, he couldn't find the china dog that always slept with him. Nana was in a hurry, so she simply looked about her, and seeing the toy cupboard door stood open, she made a swoop. "Here," she said, "take your old bunny." And she dragged the rabbit out by one ear and put him in the boy's arms. That night, and for many nights after, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first he found it rather uncomfortable, for the boy hugged him very tight, and sometimes he rolled over on him, and sometimes he pushed him so far under a pillow that Rabbit could scarcely breathe. And he missed, too, those long moonlight hours in the nursery when all the house was silent, and his talks with the skin horse. But very soon he grew to like it, for the boy talked to him and made nice tunnels for him under the blankets that he said were like burrows the real rabbits lived in. And when the boy dropped off to sleep, the rabbit would snuggle down close under his little warm chin and dream, with the boy's hands clasped close around him all night long. And so time went on, and the little rabbit was very happy. So happy he never noticed how his beautiful velveteen fur was getting shabbier and shabbier, and his tail becoming unsewn, and all the pink rubbed off his nose where the boy had kissed him. Spring came. They had long days in the garden, for wherever the boy went, the rabbit went too. He had rides in the wheelbarrow and picnics on the grass, and lovely fairy huts built for him under the raspberry canes. And once, when the boy was called away suddenly, the rabbit was left out on the lawn until long after dusk, and Nana had to come look for him with a candle, because the boy couldn't go to sleep unless he was there. He was wet through with dew, and Nana grumbled as she rubbed him off with the corner of her apron. "You must have your old bunny," she said. "Fancy all that fuss for a toy." The boy sat up in bed and stretched out his hands. "Give me my bunny," he said. "He isn't a toy, he's real." When the little rabbit heard that, he was happy, for he knew what the skin horse had said was true at last. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was a toy no longer. He was real. The boy himself had said it. That night he was almost too happy to sleep, and into his boot-button eyes, which had long ago lost their polish, there came a look of wisdom and beauty. That was a wonderful summer. Near the house where they lived there was a wood, and in the long June evenings the boy liked to go there to play. He took the Velveteen Rabbit, and before he wandered off to play, he always made the rabbit a little nest where he would be quite cozy. One evening, while the rabbit was lying there alone, he saw two strange beings creep out of the tall grass near him. They were rabbits like himself, but furry and brand new. They must have been very well made, for their seams didn't show at all, and they changed shape in a strange way when they moved. One minute they were long and thin, and the next fat and bunchy, instead of always staying the same as he did. They stared at him, and the little rabbit stared back, and all the time their noses twitched. "Why don't you get up and play with us?" one of them asked. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit, for he didn't want to explain that he couldn't get up. "Can you hop on your hind legs?" asked the furry rabbit. That was a dreadful question for the Velveteen Rabbit. He had no hind legs at all. The back of him was made all in one piece, like a pincushion. He sat still and hoped that the other rabbits wouldn't notice, but wild rabbits have very sharp eyes, and this one stretched out his neck and looked. "He hasn't got any hind legs," he called out, and he began to laugh. "I have," cried the little rabbit. "I've got hind legs. I'm sitting on them." "Then stretch them out and show me, like this," said the wild rabbit, and he began to whirl around and dance, till the little rabbit got quite dizzy. "I don't like dancing," he said. "I'd rather sit still." But all the while he was longing to dance, for a new tickly feeling ran through him, and he felt he would give anything to be able to jump about like the rabbits did. The strange rabbit stopped dancing and came quite close. "He doesn't smell right," he said. "He isn't a real rabbit at all." "I am real," said the little rabbit. "I am. The boy said so," and he nearly began to cry. Just then there was a sound of footsteps, and the boy ran past. With a flash of white tails, the two strange rabbits disappeared. "Come back, play with me," called the little rabbit. "Oh, do come back, I know I'm real." But there was no answer. The Velveteen Rabbit was all alone. For a long time he lay very still, hoping they would come back, but they never returned. And the sun sank lower and lower, and the little white moths fluttered about, and the boy came and carried him home. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew very old and shabby, but the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he loved off all of his whiskers, and the pink lining to his ears turned gray, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape, and he scarcely looked like a rabbit anymore, except to the boy. To him, he was always beautiful, and that was all that the rabbit cared about. And then one day, The boy was ill. His little body was so hot that it burned the rabbit, and when he held him close, strange people came and went in the nursery, and a light burned all night, and through it all the little Velveteen Rabbit lay there, hidden from sight, under the bedclothes, and he never stirred, for he was afraid that if they found him, someone might take him away, and he knew that the boy needed him. It was a long, weary time, for the boy was too ill to play. The little rabbit snuggled down patiently, and looked forward to the time when the boy would be well again, and they would go out into the garden among the flowers and the butterflies, and play splendid games in the raspberry thicket like they used to. At last the boy got better. He was able to sit up in bed and look at the picture books while the little rabbit cuddled close at his side, and one day they let him get up and dress. It was a bright, sunny morning. They carried the boy outside, wrapped in a shawl, and the little rabbit lay tangled among the blankets, thinking. The boy was going to the seaside tomorrow. Now it only remained to carry out the doctor's orders. They talked about it all while the little rabbit lay under the blankets and listened. The room was to be disinfected, and all the books and toys that the boy had played with in bed must be burnt. "Whoa," thought the little rabbit. "Tomorrow we'll go to the seaside." The boy had talked often of the seaside, and he wanted very much to see the big waves coming in and the tiny crabs in the sandcastles. Just then Nana caught sight of him. "How about his old bunny?" she asked. "That," said the doctor. "Why, it's a mass of scarlet fever germs. Burn it at once." And so the little rabbit was put into a sack with the old picture books and a lot of rubbish, and carried out to the garden. That was a fine place to make a bonfire, only the gardener was too busy just then to attend to it. That night the boy slept in the different bedroom, and he had a new bunny to sleep with, but he was too excited to care much about it, for tomorrow he was going to the seaside, and he could think of nothing else. And while the boy was asleep, dreaming of the seaside, the little rabbit lay among the old picture books and rubbish, and he felt very lonely. The sack had been left untied, and so, by wriggling a bit, he was able to get his head through the opening and look out. Nearby, he could see the thickets of raspberry canes, in whose shadow he played with the boy on bygone mornings. He thought of those long sunlit hours in the garden, how happy they were, and a great sadness came over him. He thought of the skin horse so wise and gentle, and all that he had told him, and what use was it to be loved and lose one's beauty and become real, if it all ended like this? And a tear, a real tear, trickled down the shabby little velvet nose and fell to the ground. And then a strange thing happened, for where the tear had fallen, a mysterious flower grew out of the ground. It had slender green leaves the color of emeralds, and in the center of the leaves a blossom like a golden cup. It was so beautiful that the little rabbit forgot to cry, and the blossom opened, and out of it there stepped the loveliest fairy in the whole world. Her dress was of pearl and dewdrops, and there were flowers round her neck and in her hair. And she came close to the little rabbit and gathered him up in her arms and kissed him on his velveteen nose that was all damp from crying. "Little rabbit," she said, "I'm the nursery magic fairy. I take care of all the playthings that children have loved. When they're old and worn out, and when children don't need them any more, then I come and take them away with me to turn them into real." "Wasn't I real before?" asked the rabbit. "You were real to the boy," the fairy said, "because he loved you. Now you shall be real to everyone." And she held the little rabbit close in her arms and flew him to the wood. It was light now, for the moon had risen. All the forest was beautiful. In the open glade, where there were tree trunks, the wild rabbits danced with their shadows on the velvet grass. But when they saw the fairy, they all stopped dancing and stood round in a ring to stare at her. "I brought you a new playfellow," the fairy said. "You must be very kind to him and teach him all he needs to know, for he's going to live with you forever and ever." And she kissed the little rabbit again and put him down on the grass. "Run and play, little rabbit," she said. But the little rabbit sat quite still for a moment and never moved, for when he saw all the wild rabbits dancing around him, he suddenly remembered about his hind legs, and he didn't want them to see he was made all in one piece. He didn't know that when the fairy kissed him that last time, she had changed him altogether. He might have sat there a long time, too shy to move, if just then something hadn't tickled his nose, and before he thought about what he was doing, he lifted his hind toe to scratch it, And he found that he actually had hind legs instead of dingy velveteen. He had brown fur, soft and shiny. His ears twitched by themselves, and his whiskers were so long they brushed the grass. He gave one leap, and the joy of using those hind legs was so great that he went springing about on them, jumping sideways and whirling round as the others did. He grew so excited that when at last he did stop to look for the fairy, she had gone. He was a real rabbit at last, at home with the other rabbits. Autumn passed, and winter, and in the spring, when the days grew warm and sunny, the boy went out to play in the wood behind the house, and while he was playing, 2 rabbits crept out and peeped at him. One of them was brown all over, but the other had strange markings under his fur, as though long ago he had been spotted, and the spots still showed through. And about his little soft nose and his round black eyes there was something familiar, so that the boy thought to himself, "Why, he looks just like my old bunny that was lost when I had scarlet fever." But he never knew that it really was his own bunny, come back to look at the child who had first helped him to be real.